All right, let's go ahead and do it. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to a joint webinar between Spiff and the Brevet Group, why SaaS companies are rethinking sales compensation. We're excited to have you all today. We're going to do a couple things. Obviously, we're going to spend some time with some quick intros. We're going to talk about some key learnings based on a survey that we jointly sent out and have collected some really great intelligence to really help inform your sales compensation planning as you start to think about plans for next year. We're going to open it up to some Q&A at the end, but as always, we want to keep this engaging. We're going to have a conversation. We want you to be a part of that conversation. So please don't hesitate to use the chat. Post some questions in Q&A. We'll answer as many as we can during the time we have together. We're looking forward to your engagement throughout this. We also have some polls to do some quick census of the population of the group here today. To really help us as a group sort of reflect on some of the changes that we're seeing within sales compensation plans within the SaaS industry. And as organizations are starting to evaluate plans for next year, what are some of those key trends that you all should be thinking about? As we get started today, I'm joined by my good friend from Spiff, Max Sadler, a solutions architect. My name is Ralph Grimsey, partner at the Brevet Group. I've been doing this a long time. We're a sales effectiveness consulting firm, been in this space for over 20 years, have seen hundreds of thousands of comp plans over my career, and excited to bring some of the latest insights and trends that we're seeing within the SaaS industry to you all today. Max, how about just a quick intro for the folks?
Yeah, thanks, Ralph. Hi, everyone. Max Sadler, Senior Solutions Architect here at Spiff. I work with our prospective customers primarily, helping them to solution and make sure that their plans are ready to be put into an incentive compensation management tool. I have quite a few years of experience in the space, working with a few different tools, and now enjoying my time over here at Spiff.
Awesome. Thanks, Max. Hey, listen, I think the goal of today was to sort of put together two bits of perspectives. One is, where we sit and typically engage organizations and sort of at the table in boardrooms, on Zoom calls, talking about design. And there we're trying to translate sort of the strategic intent of an organization and align it with the roles to ultimately build plans. Max's perspective is a little different, right? He's got to come in from the implementation perspective. How does this get codified into a system? How does this ultimately get executed? And hopefully today's discussion between the two of us will give you sort of a lens into both sides, what's happening in the boardroom and what's happening as we start to execute these plans. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this, our goal is to sort of reflect on a recent survey that we completed. And the survey was focused specifically to address SaaS compensation policies and practices. The goal of the survey was to address all of those design questions where, if you're engaging folks like us on the consulting side or you're talking to your peers, the question often gets answered with, it depends. And our goal in the survey was to really help answer and to put data around a lot of those policy questions that, ultimately, we see a lot of variation on in the market. And so we're going to talk about a few of those aspects today. We're going to highlight sales crediting, the use of accelerators, how renewals are handled, and how we treat new hires. Those are four key areas that we saw an opportunity to sort of dig a little deeper, have a conversation, bring some insights from the survey, but also bring you all into the conversation as well. As a participant in today's session, you are going to get a full copy of the survey results. Okay, there's a lot more questions that we pose in the survey and more data that's available to you. The survey was sent to SaaS organizations, and they vary in size. And one of the things you're going to see as we start to share some of these results and talk about each of these key trends from the highlighted sections is that the answer to a lot of these policies and practices often depends on the size of the organization, where you are in your maturity process, what is the level and rigor size of that install base of customers versus that new logo hunting motion that is out there. So we're looking forward to kind of diving in. Max and I are going to have a conversation about these things. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to kick it off with sales crediting. Sales crediting is a topic that oftentimes gets overlooked as we sort of think about plan design. It's a topic that has always sort of pitted sales and finance oftentimes at different ends of the spectrum. As we think about sales crediting, we are referring to specifically when a seller would get credit for a deal, credit being defined as when that quota would be retired, and also when it would be paid. And so as we reflect on the survey results, a couple things sort of stood out to us as we think about that crediting event. One of the biggest things that we saw is that, sellers and sales organizations want to attach that credit as close to the event as possible. So you see a lot of measurement and payment at bookings, right? Obviously, as we record that deal within that month or that quarter, we're providing that credit. One of the highlights this year is we're starting to see a trend is that there's continued movement away from bookings and starting to explore other milestones that happen in that sales cycle to revenue, or that cycle to revenue, as common crediting milestones. And so what are some of the attributes that we see if we dig behind this a little bit, where we've seen obviously continued pressure as we come out of the pandemic, things around client acceptance, the time of implementation, the time that we actually start to invoice and revenue is realized for those organizations that are moving to consumption-based models. So we're starting to see shifts in where crediting is applied for sellers. And we're also starting to see some shift in terms of the frequency as well too. But I want to bring Max into the conversation. Max, as you sort of think about crediting, you think about some of the conversations you're having with prospects or with customers implementing Spiff, what are some of the common trends you're seeing related to crediting?
Yeah, thanks, Ralph. So, these results really are not surprising at all to me. I'm definitely seeing an increase in the shift away from bookings and more towards these other events that we've discussed. Now, that being said, I think what we end up seeing be the most successful from the lens of the sales representative themselves is giving that upfront credit on the booking. Part of the whole point of moving to a tool like Spiff, for example, is that maximum visibility, that near real-time transparency into what are the deals I'm selling, and then how am I getting comped on those. And when you start adding in all these other events that lead to crediting that may happen after the deal actually closes, every little event you add adds complexity, and you get further away from that 100% transparency.
Yeah, it's a great point, right? And I think a lot of times we see, this is where finance may be winning some of these battles, right? Finance wants to get that credit milestone as close as they can to revenue, right? So we're not advancing all of this payment in at the time of booking. And so when we see this point around shift, it's not 100% shift. Okay, and I want to be clear about that, right? What we are starting to see is sort of the existence of additional milestones. So what we continue to see is, there's a portion that's paid on booking, but there's also a portion paid maybe on implementation or invoice. Many SaaS organizations are, as you sort of explore consumption-based models or implementations of your solution that do take some time, that might be a quarter or two out before you actually start to see implementation and invoice and revenue being recognized from that. So I'm curious, Max, as you sort of think about some of these other milestones, are there any ones in particular that are sort of, you're having more conversations on: implementation, invoice, cash receipt?
Yeah, so I guess first I'll say I like this idea in theory, but I think that this tends to be handled outside of the comp tool, which isn't necessarily the best place to handle it, right? You want that clear translation over to the comp tool for these milestone events, but a lot of times they handle this, upstream, and then we only get that final credit amount. And that's really kind of, skipping the beat there and missing the point on why you would bring that into the tool. Additionally, I think it just opens the door, again, for those convoluted processes that can be really challenging to follow. So communication and education are going to be really key here. Now, an area that I think that, we do see this is when we have companies that have really long sales cycles, and you kind of need to maintain that momentum throughout. And so, anything that's like pre-deal close milestones, giving credit in that way, I think is a really good approach if you do have a complex long-term sales cycle.
Yeah. Crediting is one kind of aspect of your policy, of your plan that has ripple effects. As you think about implementing a milestone-based crediting approach, what we often hear is sort of some of the noise around either seller cash flow, right? They're not getting cash and meeting sort of their OTE within the year because of the extension of these milestone credits, year-over-year crediting issues. So what happens sort of, is in Q1 or Q2 of a particular year, you're still going back to the prior year to capture that credit and make that payment. And obviously, we've been dealing with a level of turnover in many SaaS organizations that we haven't seen before. So oftentimes, maintaining this milestone crediting approach creates some challenges, and why you need a system and a tool and an effective ICM to manage all of this becomes really important as you start to think about more complex crediting motions. So I think this is a great time maybe to kind of launch a poll and get you all into the conversation. Let's do our first poll, and let's go. As you sort of take a look at the poll that we just launched, let's pose the question to y'all. When are you crediting your reps, right? We obviously sort of showed you some data in terms of the survey. Is it at booked? Is it at invoice? Are you using something else in terms of a milestone approach? Let's hear from the group and see what's out there. While those votes are coming in, and again, for those of you that are first time in Goldcast, take a look. You can see the panel to your right there, and go ahead and participate in the poll. Now, one of the things that comes up in crediting oftentimes is the overall structure of the frequency. And a lot of SaaS organizations, like sort of discrete payment periods. They like either that discrete month or that discrete quarter. And what I mean by discrete is that sort of the quota is assigned in that quarter. It is paid out in that quarter, and you get to reset each quarter. There is sort of no look to sort of an annual number or a cumulative number or a year-to-date number. This is something that we saw really many other industries sort of take hold during the pandemic, as the discrete allows for flexibility and adjustments to quota setting on that quarter-to-quarter basis. Reps love it because if they have a bad quarter, they can have an opportunity to kind of reset and earn and perform in that quarter and earn accelerators. Max, what are you seeing? What are some of the discussions you're having with your customers around the payment period and the frequency of that crediting?
Yeah, so what we really try to push our customers to do here, because we find it really helps to maintain that momentum of motivation, is regardless of when you actually are cutting those checks, let's calculate earned commissions on at least a monthly basis, right? And with a tool like Spiff, you're able to give that daily transparency for their commissions that have been earned and dissociate that from when you actually pay them. So even if you have, other processes that do need to be taken into consideration for when you pay the reps, showing them their progress towards quota attainment, their commissions earned, and things like that is really crucial. So monthly is the ideal state here from my perspective. And for the most part, I think most of our customers are on board with that approach.
Yeah, monthly is great, right? Obviously, if you've got systems and processes in place to do so, that's obviously ideal. We do have a lot of customers that have some longer sales cycles, and they are looking to sort of align that payment, that crediting with the sales cycles. Those typically exist at the quarter. We've even got some very complex, large enterprise sellers that are working on multi-year deals in which we see that payment period being extended to a quarter or even an annual basis. Now we just launched a kind of a new poll here as well too. So looking kind of at the poll results from that first one, looks like the majority of folks are crediting their reps at booking. Few folks on invoice. Few folks are using something else, likely probably a milestone-based approach there too. Max, you want to share maybe a little bit of insights as we sort of launch this second poll around the crediting with directly on deals or utilizing an indirect crediting approach?
Yeah, for sure. So one thing we are increasingly coming across is really, rather clever and sometimes complicated processes about who owns this deal at the end of the day, right? We see people using the tools out there. There's various territory management, quota planning solutions. And the end result, in my opinion, is processes that are very challenging for the person at the end of that deal to understand. So, it's all great to have these great territory planning processes, but it's crucial that you have some way of tagging who owns that deal, who closed it directly on that deal, not only for, compensation purposes within Spiff, but also your upstream systems as well. You don't want to have your reps going on a scavenger hunt every single time to figure out, where's this deal that was in my territory that closed. So really just kind of finding that balance between something that's going to effectively, cover territories and whatnot, while also giving the visibility and transparency to your reps that they can follow and understand.
Yeah, this is an interesting point, Max. What do you think organizations are trying to solve for using an indirect approach? Is there sort of a lack of clarity of roles, or is there sort of, is it segmentation? Is it territory design issues? What do you think is sort of driving what you're seeing from an indirect perspective?
Yeah, there's a couple things there. So number one, I think organizations are getting bogged down in data, right? They have all this information about what territories look like, what opportunities and prospects might look like within that territory. And they end up creating these really data rich, data heavy territory designs, which are great in theory, but then the downstream effects of that can be really complicated and really hard to follow. So this is one of the primary challenges today with larger enterprise customers at Spiff is figuring out just how to get, the rep that closed the deal credit for that deal when they aren't listed on the deal. And you end up having to look at multiple disparate systems, and you just end up building lots of layers of logic across the board. And so when you build lots of logic like that upstream and within Spiff, you open the door for things to break down.
Yeah, I imagine it's also hard to sort of really assess, individual seller performance and productivity when you have all these sort of underlying or overlay systems to try to get to something. Frankly, as simple as, who closed that deal or who was responsible.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think another reason that organizations do adopt this is, they might have huge sales teams that are constantly, moving around, getting promoted, new hires, terminations, things like that. So it's a lot easier to just give credit to a given territory. And then whoever owns that territory at that time gets the credit. So I think that is a good approach to solve for that, constant movement within the team. Just make sure that you have those processes really locked down.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? Yeah, a lot of the customers you serve, and I think a lot of our respondents to the survey and listening to today are younger SaaS organizations that are dynamically changing. They're trying to find product market fit. It requires, very much a dynamic go-to-market model, whether it's in resources, territory cuts, segmentation, all of those things to try to get these deals done. I wanted to call out one specific chat here response. Thanks for the feedback, Aman. And I like this point, sort of, we were paying on bonus on booking and then we keep paying on invoicing. And, I don't know the specific situation there, but it suggests that we're likely, moving more towards this consumption-based model. And this is, I can't stress this enough, this is the single greatest trend in the conversations we're having with our customers, because it's changing lots of elements of the go-to-market model. And we're all relatively early days, even organizations that, have pioneered or been on this model for multiple years. They would even admit they're early days in sort of trying to really figure out all the mechanics to operationalizing the consumption-based model within their sales teams, from enablement to ops to comp. And one of the things that we know is particularly stressful on comp plans related to consumption is how do you value the booking, right? And how do you value that initial commitment? And so a lot of organizations, and this came through in our survey, are using some estimated potential, right? They're using some, whether you're selling capacity on a cloud platform, or if you're selling, a usage number based on the number of transactions or events that will happen on your platform, you're getting to some estimated amount for that bookings. And now what's happening, though, is you're having to make a decision around how much are you going to pay as a percentage of that deal against your OTE, or how much quota you're going to retire for that estimated bookings. We've seen organizations vary anywhere from 50% to 75% to 80%, being retired or paid on that initial payment. And then the next question comes in, right? Which is, how long are you paying on this? Are you paying the rep over 12 months, longer time frames? And then there's always the question of really your go-to-market model. Who's responsible for that continued consumption, right? If I get the commitment and I'm an AE, I've got that. Who's responsible for making sure that they're on the platform, they're burning units or credits, and ultimately realizing that revenue? So again, continued discussions. We've seen organizations where customer success owns a piece of that. We're now starting to see a greater shift back to AEs. Some organizations that have account manager roles are responsible here. So again, Max, a trend I'm sure that you're seeing as well too here in terms of consumption. What are some of the highlights just broadly that you're focused in on when you start to see consumption-based comp plans?
Yeah, for sure. This one's really front and center for me. It seems to be the flavor of the quarter with all the prospects and customers I'm working with. What I'll say is, I see some customers be successful with this, but by and large, most are still in a stage of trying to figure this out, right? And I think the reason for that is it's really challenging from a systems perspective. We haven't seen many customers that have gone all in on a single, start to finish RevOps tool And so you end up having to build all these linkages between different systems and really nailing the process of making sure that you have a solid flow, clear timelines of when things get booked, when invoices are received, and then when you cut compensation checks. But there's a lot to figure out there. And it does honestly make for a pretty challenging implementation in the world of ICM. So what I would say here is I think the best approach is a hybrid approach where you are giving credit for that booking up front, and then ensuring that you have a simple yet clear linkage to what are the other events that identify that consumption, right? If you don't have that clear flow, it becomes really frustrating for the sales rep and even for your compensation teams to figure out how to pay the rest of the commission, right? So it's just crucial that you have those linkages between the systems.
Yeah, so much to dig in here. I would love to see just maybe on the quick check, give us kind of a quick +1 if consumption is a topic that you're having with your teams, right? Whether it's, how to pay them, the systems required, how the go-to-market model changes, how your quotas are starting to change, right? If you truly believe in the consumption model, you're executing a land and expand motion. Those are smaller ACV deals. The front end, maybe they're just POCs, for instance. And then you're now really trying to drive into specific revenue. So again, would love you guys to sort of chime into the conversation. Give me a +1 if you've got consumption-based conversations are sort of hitting your desk or at the top of mind in your organization. All right, let's make a little bit of a transition here. Let's keep it moving. Talk a little bit about kind of the second key point in our survey. We wanted to share a little bit on accelerators. Obviously, organizations love to talk about accelerators, right? And again, I love this sort of always dynamic between sales and finance in these conversations. Sales will point to accelerators never being enough. Our top reps are leaving. They can go make money elsewhere. We want to set quotas at a rate where, they can get into those accelerators. We want to build that winning culture. And then, of course, our finance colleagues come in and say, are we sure we're paying the right amount here? This seems like quite a bit of money at the, for sales and for our top performers. So as always, with many things sales comp related, it's always sort of a balancing act between where the various constituencies are pitted against themselves, if you will, or the tension that it creates in an organization to come up with an effective comp plan. As we look at the survey results, we've seen some consistency over the years. The most common upside payout, if you think about it from a OTE basis, is that 2x. We obviously have seen plans that have more aggressive accelerators, 3 to 4x. And if you're looking at your commission rate and you're looking at how do I convert this in from a base rate perspective, we did ask some questions around base rates, and you can see some of the data there. I mean, overall, what we're seeing is some consistency here. 2x seems to be quite common. And both at sort of the upside multiple, as well as where we start to see some overall upside, slopes in the curve changing or rates changing. Max, curious, what are the things that are sort of coming into your world and conversations around accelerators and how that's being implemented?
Yeah, so honestly, no real surprises here. You could look at any rate table within Spiff and see this slide essentially. The things that are really front and center for me, and which I am, in my opinion, unfortunately, seeing more of a trend on, are adding gates to accelerators. So you may have to accomplish some other things before you can access, the next tier on your given ARR rate table, let's say. I'm also seeing a lot of caps and even decelerations when you get into higher tiers. Yeah. One of the other important aspects here that I really care about, and actually goes back to our crediting conversation, is having really easy to understand attainment calculations. How are they getting to that tier, and ensuring that the rep fully understands every aspect that goes into that attainment calculation, so that there's not all those constant disputes and questions of, hey, I should have been in tier 3, but this is showing in tier 2. So that's really, really crucial, both from the comp admin standpoint, as well as motivating your reps. Yeah,
agreed. I kind of just saw the quick Q&A. I want to go back to real quick the question that Nate posed. Thanks for the question, Nate. There was a question around why 13 months was so significant. One of the things that we see is many organizations grant that sort of first month post booking as sort of a grace period as they get implementation teams, customer success teams, have those kickoff calls with the customer. So they give the seller that extra month before the 12 months would kick in. So that's why you see 13 months as a common marking there. Jumping back to accelerators here, one of the things that we often get questions on is sort of the use of multipliers. I think just continued prevalence as SaaS organizations continue to seek longer term deals, multi-year deals, multipliers being often an effective way to accelerate quota retirements, deals that are hitting sort of whatever the strategic lens is of the organization, whether it's multi-year or certain products being aggregated into the solution, and multipliers being applied to that, really heavily used as sort of with the intent to sort of modify behavior of the sales team. Not uncommon that we see multi-year being the most common, but we do also see multipliers on net new logos, certain products, upsell, cross-sell. Oftentimes, again, spiffs are quite common in terms of what we're seeing multipliers. Max, what are you seeing? What are the discussions you're having around multipliers?
Yeah, I see multipliers in almost every build that I do. By and large, it's multi-year deals. That's the most common.
Yeah.
I also love that approach. It's super easy to understand. It's super easy to build. And I think it's a great way to motivate your reps. My comment on multipliers, though, is the dark side of them is decelerators, in my opinion. So I am seeing those more. So Ralph, I'm curious your thoughts. Is there a time and a place for decelerators? And if so,
yeah,
there's
two things today. That's a great question. There's two things on deceleration thresholds, right? We've had a lot of conversations where, you can either call it a decelerator or a threshold to say, listen, if you're not doing a 3-year deal, you're not getting credit for it. And so multipliers come with a carrot and stick conversation. Is it a multiplier that you want to incent them to sort of drive to it, but you're still either to decelerate, reduce crediting, or to establish a threshold if the deal is not multi-year, for instance? It's a conversation we're having more often. I think there is an expectation that in many SaaS organizations that 3-year deals are minimums, and that we're kind of at a point of maturity in the market that if that's not the case, then we're not accepting or paying either the same amount or at all for a 2-year deal or a 1-year deal. As we think about maybe some of the other sort of dark sides, if you will, of multipliers, thinking about the eligibility for multipliers is important. A lot of times, and we were actually I remember a specific customer situation last year when we looked at their overall cost of sales, and it was quite high, quite significant. And when we started to peel it back and understand what was driving it, we realized that multi-year eligibility was granted to the entire sales organization. So customer success got paid, sales engineering got paid, account executives got paid, sales management got paid for multi-year deals. And so that multiplier effect that happened typically at the AE level rolled up, and it got quite expensive. And so when you're looking at multi-year multipliers for multi-year, I think would pay specific attention to specifically which roles should be eligible. And you want to drive that where it's obviously we can attach the greatest level of attribution. And so typically, as you can see it in the data, you see account executives. You see some responses as well to those other roles. I think it's important, though, as you look at overall cost of sales and you're doing your modeling around multipliers, to be considering the roles here. Max, what are you seeing here as related to who's eligible?
Yeah, so this is very much in line with what I see. One other anecdote to add here, though, is with multi-year deals, from the implementation standpoint, which is a role I've served many times, in a way, multi-year deals are much more qualified coming in. If you only have 12 months to get something implemented, the sense of urgency can be through the roof there, and there can be quite a bit of tension in that process. But when something comes through, it's a 3-year deal, we find that those customers on the implementation side, again, are in it for the long haul and much more invested in the success because they know they have the time, right?
Yeah, that's good. Why don't we go ahead and open some polls here on accelerators? So, a couple of things that we noticed was, to your point, gaps, gates, decelerators, thresholds. Is there any sort of, do you apply any gates on accelerator eligibility, right? Do you have to sort of hit multi-products in order to get accelerators, for instance? We've seen some of that. And then to your point, we were just talking about, you're starting to see some caps earlier. Do we cap accelerator rates at all too? So let's open some quick polls here, bring you guys into the conversation. Let's go to the Q&A as well here too. Luis, Considering not as an organization, we are considering not paying sales reps on renewal and moving renewal to a dedicated team. Okay, you're reading ahead, Louise. We've got a whole section on renewals. We'll get to that in a minute here. So let's hold off on that, and we'll talk about renewals and what we're seeing there. As with these poll results come in, a couple things that are highlighted here. Do you see any gates on accelerator eligibility? It's kind of split. Looks like we do have some organizations that are using that. We also are seeing some organizations that are not. It's kind of quite evenly split, actually, right? And then the other one we opened, do you cap accelerator rates? Now, what's your take on caps, Max? Are you seeing it, like, under what situations? Are there any patterns in which you're seeing organizations deploy caps?
Yes, definitely. So, heading into more uncertain times with the economy is a great time that you start seeing more caps. I was in the implementation world when COVID first came about, and we saw a lot of SaaS organizations, very much scrambling to apply caps as, when everyone was shifting to remote, certain sales were through the roofs and caps were necessary. So it really seems to be reactive and opportunistic for the most part. I haven't seen, really steady organizations that just have caps to have them.
It's one of the funniest things that happens in comp design, right? It's, the tide comes in and everybody's moving to remote. And if you're a rep at DocuSign or Zoom or wherever, right, and you're blowing out your number, they want to put in caps. And then all of a sudden now the macroeconomic event starts to change, right? Interest rates are up, budgets are a little tighter. And then what's the conversation now? Like, how do we protect them? It's not the same level of conversation, to be honest. We don't get the same sort of, fallback options as quickly as we were to sort of, put those caps in. A lot of times we're not as quick to sort of put in the safety nets for these sellers as well, too. So again, one of the dynamics that we see playing out here. All right, as we look at the results coming in on the cap side, most folks are actually not implementing, have accelerated caps, though we do have some portion of folks that are. And again, a lot of times where we see caps coming in play, you're finding product market fit. You have some bluebirds, you have some whales out there. You land your first 7-figure deal. You ask you for an first 8-figure deal, right? Those are some instances that will start to generate the conversation around caps. Good. All right, let's go to where Louise wants to go. Let's talk a little bit about renewals. As we sort of look at renewals, obviously a key trend. And a lot of this is really based on the maturity of the organization and the size and nature of that install base. And that will help define who's ultimately responsible. As we look at the survey results, we asked this question around responsibility, and it's really split. And I don't think that the survey does a fair enough justice to sort of really get into the situations in which why you might have an account executive responsible for renewals versus CSM or an account manager. One of the things that we see is, if we were to chart this over the size and maturity model of the SaaS organization, the account executives are typically in younger organizations responsible for those bookings. Then it flips to CSM for the renewal. The renewal base gets so much, and there's so much upsell and responsibility in that, we start to see either it flip to an account manager or the introduction of a renewal specialist role. And then at some point, it kind of starts to come back to the AE as well, because renewal starts to have, as your product continues to have more features, more modules, more things to cross-sell, the account executive often comes back in as an opportunity for cross-sell. So it really depends based on where you are, the nature of the product, how much opportunity you have for expansion in the renewal motion. If it is simply single product, single threaded in terms of what the renewal motion is, we see the first step is to implement a renewal specialist. And it's typically a 1-person, 2-person, 3-person type role initially. They're often inundated with quite a volume of renewals as the organization continues to grow. And then the evolution will then, as I mentioned, take hold. It either goes back to a dedicated AM role or an AE role. As you see this, Max, and I know Spiff is even an organization that is wrestling with this. So, how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, I'm going to lump renewals with expansions as well. While I agree with this slide that it is a team effort, I also think to a certain extent, when it's everyone's job, it's no one's job, right? And that reflects in almost every single comp plan that I build. It seems like renewals is just an afterthought that's thrown into the component or the payout rule, and they get some percentage on it. I think I've seen maybe 2 dedicated renewal compensation components in the last year. And I do think it is, to a certain extent, a function of the maturity of the organization. But in the world of SaaS, especially in the startup space, which is where Spiff is, we very much go for a land and expand model. We might, target a subset of a huge company with the hopes of going back and expanding. But if you don't have a formalized process in place, like a dedicated expansions and renewals team, that's just going to sit there and be forgotten about, right? The other thing I do want to touch on is, I think to a certain extent, if you are still comping the AE on renewals, you will end up with more qualified deals to begin with. So it's crucial to keep that component.
I love that point. That you're spot on, right? And we actually saw this really come in at the beginning of COVID, and it's continued sort of this greater emphasis on qualified deals. Holding the account executives to the churn number is really the mindset of having them responsible for that renewal, right? Qualified deals coming in. And this consumption model is changing this as well too. As organizations focus on, smaller POCs to start, smaller land deals, the expansion becomes critical. They got to be qualified. They can't be churning. The account executive really needs to be responsible for bringing that in. So I want to launch a poll here too as well. We've got some, do you have a dedicated renewals team poll? Let's get that going as we sort of continue this conversation. There's lots of danger zones around renewals and commissions. One of the things that many organizations, have struggled with was early renewals. And I know of one in particular that, they didn't have the policy quite right, and the reps figured it out. And guess what reps do is they'll look at that plan and they'll exploit it. And there was a lot of early renewals that counted as new bookings. If you look at your plan right now, I want to be very clear on this, is you should be explicitly looking to see if you've got the language of the policy in there right around the crediting of an early renewal. There's early renewals that oftentimes can get categorized as a new booking. And you really have to have an evaluation. Is that really truly a new booking? Was there an expansion, or was simply just a pull forward of that renewal and the additional years added to that contract that created that economic event that needs to be credited? But should it be credited as a renewal or as a new booking? And so we see some criteria. A lot of times organizations are crediting that new contract less that existing contract. So there's that net portion that is being credited for that renewal. They're not giving the seller the full credit for the renewal. And that's really the best practice here. You want to be conscious that you're not just repaying for the same amount of revenue that you would have already gotten had that renewal come to term. But you also want to make sure that the sellers are being encouraged to be active in that account and to sort of continue to expand that account and to secure larger deals. Max, are you seeing this play out? Is this a topic that you're a conversation you're having?
Absolutely. So that point where is it a renewal or is it new business? That seems to be one of the single most common areas where manual intervention from the comp admin team is required within Spiff. It seems to be very challenging to build out in a programmatic way, and almost always requires eyes on. So, I don't necessarily know all the reasons for that. Each organization is going to be different, but it is really important to analyze that more carefully, because, you as the comp admin, you don't want to spend all day, with disputes around whether this was new business or renewals.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you can see some of the folks there. We've identified the functional teams that are getting the credit, who is getting the credit. I can see, based on the first poll, most folks, don't have yet a dedicated renewals team, right? And I think that's, again, as we talked about, speaking a little bit to the size and scale of the organization. Got a few folks on the call that do, and I imagine that those are bigger organizations with a larger install base, as there's quite a bit of work probably associated with those renewals. Let's pose the question around the AEs, right? We asked, the data suggests that we're starting to see more of a trend for AEs to be paid on the renewals, likely obviously at a lower rate, but having them tied in. I'm curious of the audience here, are AEs comped on renewals? Are you comping them on that renewal and attaching them sort of, in a mindset as well as in compensation to that account for a longer time period than just the booking? So as we see some of these results come in, Max, any other kind of points that you're seeing around the renewals as you start to build plans for next year?
I just find it funny that it says mixed reaction here, because that's totally reflecting in the comp plans. It's literally all over the place. And like I said, lots of manual intervention there, very hard to build out because there simply is not process there. And it looks like we have a 50-50 tie on whether AEs are compound renewals. That's also exactly what I see. So
yeah, that's it, right? Again, the point of the survey was trying to answer some clarity, was trying to get us to some data to try to break some of these ties that we see in the market, and try to get to a more definitive answer than it depends. Unfortunately, some of these answers or questions are still answered with it depends, right? And there's lots of factors that we've identified already that drive whether or not you're doing some of these things. You've got a renewal rep and how you're treating early renewals. Let's keep the conversation going. I don't see anything else coming in the Q&A, but again, please don't hesitate to pose any questions along the way. We're going to go to kind of our final kind of highlight of the survey, and a reminder, you guys will get the full survey where we tackle some other topics as well too. But let's talk about new hires. This is one in which, man, lots of conversations, lots of pain around. There's lots of Google Sheets, I imagine, that are existing in your organization in terms of how you're handling new hire, ramp of quota, retirement of that quota, and the ultimate payment of that quota. And so the questions that we posed in the survey was really trying to assess, what are the adjustments that we're making for new hires? Are we guaranteeing them? Are they getting a grace period? Are they eligible for acceleration in terms of on that ramp quota? If you blow out a ramp quota, do you get paid on that? How long are we adjusting that quota? Is that something that's, a couple months? Is it a quarter? Is it longer? And then ultimately, how are we adjusting? Is it a guarantee? Do we lower quota expectations? Do they get rate adjustments? Is it best of? How are we treating new hires? Max, what do you see from a new hire perspective?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. For whatever reason, I see this on the extremes. Either new hire ramps are extremely generous, like they're giving them 12 months of their full OTE, or there's literally nothing at all. Like they're just thrown into the fire. I don't necessarily know the reasons for that, but that is what I see. One of the more complicated parts of new hire ramps that I see in almost every single build is most customers do allow ramping reps to access accelerators, but there seems to be this weird area between your ramp quota and your full quota. So if they're between that, what happens? And I haven't seen anyone have a really good answer there.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? And again, I think, when you look at cost of sales, there can be some significant dollars associated with new reps given a great patch, and kudos to them, or really successful in ramping that outperform their ramp quota to a significant degree. And so this acceleration eligibility is a conversation we have with new hires quite a bit. And a lot of times where we're advising is it's yes, but not until they get to their full quota, right? Or to a fully productive. It's something greater than their ramp. Will continue to earn in a linear basis above ramp. So if you're 150% of your ramp quota, you get to earn 150%, but you're not earning the multiplier on that until the full amount is offered. And so oftentimes we see that as a way to sort of balance the motivation of that new seller coming in, being successful with some of the financial concerns, like, yeah, you blew out your number, but we gave you, a $200,000 goal for that quarter, right? So how do we sort of balance the comp payouts associated with the actual revenue being contributed in that? So you can see it in some of the survey results there, and I apologize, it's a bit of an eye chart there, but on the acceleration eligibility. The other point, and again, I think this speaks a little bit to the sales cycles, is we see the most common period kind of being in that first quarter, right? 3 months is really kind of the standard around where you're giving some of that ramp time. If it's longer, it's because you've got a strategic rep, they're longer sales cycles. That's where we typically see some of the longer time periods. I would say quarter is pretty consistent. Would you agree with that, Max?
Yeah, that one actually is surprising to me. I tend to see longer term ramps, but that might also be just a function of customers choosing not to automate ramps within Spiff.
Yeah.
One comment there, it seems that a lot of times a customer can have a really straightforward comp plan, but then their ramp is totally crazy. And we end up spending like 70% of the effort just trying to automate ramps. So, right. I would challenge everyone here to think to themselves, if the ramp is so complex, is anyone actually going to be able to follow that? Does it even accomplish its goal?
I can imagine the Google Sheets that you're looking at that are driving that, right? You got
For sure.
time, you got quota ramping in various intervals. You know, depending on the start quarter, you know, a lot of these things are back weighted to the end of the year in Q4. So I can imagine. And then you're not only adjusting that, you might adjust the rate as well too, all to try to get to a common OTE or the intended OTE for that seller. We do see quite a bit of guarantees here for that period of time. And I like your point earlier, right? Which is you see kind of one end or the other, really sort of generous new hire guidelines, presenting them with those guarantees or maybe kind of thrown right to the fire. It's surprising, right? We're in an interesting talent market. And the talent market, as we sit here in September, was very different than it was in February. And I think the conversations that I know we're having already is, you know, adjustment of some of these things. I don't think we're seeing as generous of policies heading into next year as we did, you know, earlier this year. And I think it's a reflective of the macroeconomic environment. Are you seeing this play out as well as you sort of zoom out a bit, think about the macroeconomic conditions that a lot of these SaaS organizations that have maybe just executed a RIF for the first time, looking to sort of consolidate spend to get a little bit more runway as they find product market fit? How do you see that playing into either new hire expansion in the plans?
Absolutely. I mean, both with ramps and new hire expansion, things like that. First part of this year is when I saw the most generous ones, and that is definitely changing as we speak.
Yeah. Would love to hear from the folks on the call as well too. Give us kind of a thumbs up, give us kind of a +1 if you're starting to see both, you know, new hire classes, you know, decreasing. We're obviously seeing a lot of folks that are pulling back on hiring sellers, as well as some policy changes to new hire guidelines. Give us kind of a quick thumbs up if you're seeing that as well too. Well, I want to kind of keep the momentum going. Max, really great conversation. Any kind of final comments, thoughts as you sort of reflect on the survey, the conversations you're having? I know many folks in the audience here are starting to think about planning for FY24. Any sort of final comments or thoughts for the
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, a lot of the results from this survey weren't super surprising to me, but from my perspective, the most important thing to keep in mind is maximizing transparency and maximizing plans that your reps can understand at the end of the day. You know, Spiff is a tool that gives you the ability to really motivate your reps and give them that near real time, you know, view into what deals they're closing, how they're tracking with attainment and commissions and whatnot. But when you start to pile on convoluted processes, you have all these disparate systems upstream trying to talk to each other, it becomes really challenging not only to administer, but also to keep your reps motivated. So I would just encourage everyone to strive for simplicity and make it clear how you are comping your reps.
Yeah, and listen, from our perspective, you know, part of the reason we partner with Spiff on the survey and in today's webinar is if you're a modern SaaS organization and you're not leveraging kind of a system and tool to do this kind of work, you're really missing out. You're missing out on a lot of intelligence around your comp plan, where it's performing, where it's not. Obviously, you're missing out on the cost savings from the administration side, both the hard costs and the soft costs. And so there's a lot of great benefits to obviously leveraging a tool like this. And at the forefront, you know, if you're looking for partners to sort of think about, help you think through the changing dynamics, consumption models, aligning the roles, getting these plans designed in a way to be most effective to achieve your strategic objectives, that's where we play. And we're eager to hear from you all. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can find us, reach out, say hello. Any further questions, you can hit us up now in the Q&A. But if there's nothing else coming through, I think we'll go ahead and wrap today. That sound good, Max?
Sounds good to me. Thanks, everyone.
All right, guys. Thank you. Enjoy your comp planning season.